Over the years, you'll learn things along the way. You'll look at things differently. Take time and reflect on lessons you've learned. Find some way to channel your grief in a meaningful and positive way. It will always be there. You just sort of grow around the grief and the loss. Find a new way of relating to the person that is gone.
That was the voice of Dottie Menkhaus, our special guest for today. Welcome back to Nurturing Words, Voices of Experience, a podcast from the Motherless Daughters Ministry just for you. Now stay right there and hear the rest of her story about 20 years of grief.
Hello, welcome to episode 55 of Nurturing Words, Voices of Experience. Today we welcome Dottie Menkhaus to the podcast. Dottie will be sharing her reflections on being a motherless daughter on the 20th anniversary of her mother's death. Listen in as she shares her experience, wisdom, and heart with you today. Welcome, Dottie.
Thanks for having me, Gina. I'm Dottie. I'm a volunteer with Motherless Daughters Ministry. I work on the podcast and as a blogger. And today I would like to reflect on the 20-year anniversary of my mother's death. Tomorrow, Friday, March 24th, my mom will have been gone for 20 years. I am currently 36 years old, so my mom passed when I was 16. And it's hard to believe that my mother has been gone for 20 years. That is just a stunning number to me because I'm only 36 and she's been gone for 20 years. Turning over into that new decade, it's a little bit hard to take because it just sort of hammers home that my mom's been gone for a really long time and how much time that she has missed of my life. She missed seeing my high school graduation. She missed me going off to college and getting my degrees. She missed me starting my career and, getting my corporate job. And there's just so much of my life that she's missed and that I have missed of her life. I never got the chance to know her as an adult. I've only known her as, my authority figure, my mother. When you get into adulthood, that's when you sort of become friends with your parents and they seem cool again. And so, yeah, it's been a little bit difficult with this anniversary because it feels like a big one. There are many things that I remember about that day. My mom had breast cancer, and so she was at hospice, and it was hard to watch her decline in that way. Your parents are supposed to be strong, healthy, people, and just to see her kind of wither away from cancer was difficult, especially as a teenager. And I remember going after school to visit her and expecting to talk to her, but she was in a coma. And I was told to say goodbye, and that's very difficult for a 16-year-old to do. And it was really hard. I went to the bathroom, I came back, and she was gone. And, it was very difficult. Since then, I've had to deal with my grief, and as a 16-year-old, it's hard to know what to do with grief. It's not something you really learn in childhood, the tools to deal with grief. And I had to try to find my own way, and that was difficult. There was definitely some very hard years there. I think my mom would be proud to see how I've turned it around, and I'm trying to use that experience for good, by volunteering for this organization. And I always try to honor her and remember her. I have to say, after 20 years, there are a lot of things I feel like I've forgotten about my mom, and that hurts because you want to remember everything, but after 20 years, some things aren't as sharp as they used to be. And I also believe that because there was a lot of trauma around that time, my mom initially got sick when I was 12 years old, and she went through rigorous rounds of chemo and radiation and surgeries, and she was in and out of the hospital, and there were times where I wasn't sure if she was going to live or die as she was being rushed to the hospital in the middle of the night. And a lot of those things I do remember, but I think that there's sort of a trauma block in my mind to where I don't remember things as clearly. And so I think there's some things, with my mom that are sort of blocked out of my mind because that was a really traumatic time. And it really makes me sad, but at least there are people in my life, like my mom's best friend, Jean, who I'm also friends with, who will point out, like, how much I am like my mom. Like, oh, you just said that, like, just like your mom did. Or they'll talk about memories of my mom, and it's comforting to have that reminder. I frequently wonder how things would have been different if she were still here. I think because she was gone at such a crucial age where you kind of build your identity, like your teen years. Even though my dad and I butted heads at the time, we didn't really get along too well. I ended up becoming my father, basically, just like him, a carbon copy mini-me of him. I ended up emulating him. I became, like, I followed in his career footsteps, which when I was in high school, I never would have thought that I would have. My dad was a research chemist, and I ended up following in his footsteps and doing chemistry. I'm in the chemical industry. I've been in the chemical industry my entire career. And if somebody would have told me in high school that I would be where I am in my career, I would say, you're making that up. There's no way. Because when I was in high school, I was terrified of chemicals. Whenever they showed the little science safety video of things exploding and everything, I was terrified. I took genetics class instead. I was like, this chemistry stuff is not for me. I'm taking genetics instead. Felt like the safer route. But here I am. I worked in chemical labs for at least a decade, and I have gotten hurt a few times, but I never would have thought I'd end up out. But I became just like Dad. And the older I get, the more I see how much like him I am, and my interests, and even with the way I laugh and everything. And even with the way I dress, I go to work, I wear a polo shirt. And that's what Dad wore whenever he went to work, was a polo shirt. And I sometimes wonder, well, if Mom were still here, would I have become like her? Because when I was little, I was her mini-me. I dressed just like Mom, And sometimes I wonder if I would have chose a different career path if she was here. I don't know. I guess I'll never know. But it's just sort of things that I think about. And things do come up over time as I process, the grief of the loss of my mom over the past 20 years. As I get older, I view things differently because each stage of life you mature and you see things differently as you age. Recently, one of my friends that I worked with, Dave, he passed away suddenly a few days ago. And he was the same age that my mom was, 48. And that struck me because he seemed so young. And I never realized how young my mom really was. I do realize that she did die young because she was 48 and she didn't make it to 50. She knew she was young. At the end, her sister was turning 50 that year. And she joked with her sister saying, well, you're turning 50, but I'm the one in Depends. And she would laugh, she knew she'd be forever young. But as a 16-year-old, 48 seemed old because I was 16. But now that I'm 36 and my friend Dave passed at 48, I realize how very young he was and how full of life he was. And how full of life my mom was at that time. And how much more life she had left. And, when it came time to know what to say to Dave's wife, Corinne, who was also my friend, I struggled to know what to say. Like, what do I say to my friend who lost her person, her husband? And then I thought about how when my mom died, I called up my friends who were my age and was crying to them because my mom had just died. And I'm thinking, gosh, what a hard position they were in, because they were 16 and they didn't know what to say. And if I'm at 36 and trying to figure out what to say to my friend, I would think it would be very hard for them to even know what to say or what to react or how to comprehend the loss I just had. And I realize now that I can't really judge them harshly for the way they reacted. I did lose some friends during that time, and I think it was just because they really didn't know how to react or what to say, what to do. They probably felt helpless. They wanted to probably help me, but they just didn't know, And so I can't fault them for anything, because that's just really hard. But, now that I'm older, I know there's resources. There's one that's this book that I have that's actually very helpful, and I've read through it before, and I think it did help me in knowing kind of how to handle, knowing what to say to my friend who just went through this big loss. And the book is titled What to Say When You Don't Know What to Say in Times of Grief, Heartache, and Crisis. It's by H. Norman Wright. And it's, if you have someone in your life who's gone through a big loss or is going through a crisis, it's a really good book to have on your bookshelf to help you know how to help them or how to comfort them. So I've processed, a lot of things over the years. And, I've thought about how can I honor my mom, for the 20 years. I've definitely felt this push within myself to honor her in some special way, to sort of commemorate the 20-year anniversary. Usually for, her special days, like her birthday is March 3rd. And actually this year, her birthday was surprisingly very difficult for me. I struggled with her birthday this year. I cried a lot in the lead up. I was really sad. And in some ways, her birthday felt harder than it did for this anniversary, because so far I haven't really cried much of that, but I've also had a lot going on, too, that sort of distracted me from it. But I had a hard time. But for her birthday and her anniversary, I usually go to the cemetery and I take her flowers. And for her birthday, I took her flowers and I sang her happy birthday. And then her favorite place that she always ate at was Frisch's. And she always loved her hot fudge cake from Frisch's. So I always go to Frisch's and get hot fudge cake on that day. But for the 20 year, it feels like it needs something. And about 10 years ago, I had written a piano piece. And the piano piece is my mom's life in music and how I sort of hear her life play out, on the piano keys. And I created a video on YouTube of the music and of like pictures that depict her life. And looking back on it now, it's sort of a rough video. The piano's out of tune, the editing was so. I've gotten better at my editing skills by now, but I want to, for the 20th, redo the video, and it won't be complete by tomorrow, by no means. I'd rather take my time with it and have it be exactly right and how I wanted it. And, I'll try to get that done in a few months, but that's my way of honoring my mother and sort of commemorating her and her life and just sharing her life and the person that she was. But, anniversaries are difficult times. The grief can pull you down suddenly out of the blue, like it did for her birthday this year for me. And over the years, you'll learn things along the way. You'll look at things differently as time goes on. And I just encourage you to take time and reflect on maybe lessons you've learned or different perspectives you may have that have seen over the years, and find some way to channel your grief in a meaningful and positive way. It will always be there. It never really goes away. You just sort of grow around the grief and the loss of the person, you have to find a new way of relating to the person that is gone. I always have a picture of my mom out. I have a picture of her on my desk, as well as a picture of my grandmother, my auntie, who have also passed. It's their way of keeping them with me at work. And, I talk to her, I visit her gravesite, give her flowers, and, I just find a way to sort of keep her memory alive and keep her around. But, just find some way in your own special way to honor your mom and channel it into something new.
We're going to take a break to share a special announcement. Stay with us to hear the rest of this powerful story.
Change Your Life, the Journey Retreat, coming April 2023 to Cincinnati, Ohio. The Journey, Healing the Wounds of Mother Loss One Step at a Time, is a residential retreat focusing on mother loss and its effect on your life, how her absence shapes your identity, influences your style of mothering and relationships, how your grief surfaces throughout your lifetime, and how you experience living beyond your mother's final years. This weekend could literally change your life. Are you ready? Learn more at motherlessdaughtersministry.com. Dottie, thank you so much for all of the wisdom and experience you've shared with us today. There are a couple of things that Dottie shared that are resources that we will make sure are available to our listeners in our show notes. One of them was the book you just mentioned. Thank you for sharing that. I always wondered what to say. I might need it for what to say with more than just things about grief, but that's a personal issue. But how wonderful to find resources. And I love that. I know it was hard as a 16-year-old to know where to find the resources. And that's one of the reasons why we're so grateful to volunteer for this organization, that they do provide resources for us in this area of mother loss and grief. So we will make sure to include that. And one of the other things that really jumped out to me today, Dottie, was when you shared that how we grow and we grow around the grief. And in that, you said something that I found really profound and wondered how you came to figure that out. Like if there's more around when you started to think this way. And here's what I wrote down that you said. You said a new way of relating to the person you are grieving. That as, we go through the decades, we're growing around the grief. And then we also find a new way in that journey of grief of relating as well to that person who's no longer with us.
Yes. I guess it's just something that I've realized over the years. I have grown around the grief. I think part of that growth is channeling the greatest tragedy of my life, which is the loss of my mother, and turning it into something beautiful. And that's volunteering and helping other people that are going through loss and grief. And in some ways, many ways, it's a privilege to have an understanding, because no matter what type of grief it is, the loss of, brother, sister, father, spouse, you can help someone in need that is grieving and sort of have an understanding and be able to be the person that's there for them in a hard time. So many people, I think, are afraid of grief, that they say to somebody, "Oh, I'm sorry for your loss," and then they're afraid to talk to that person. I know in, one of the support groups, someone had mentioned that, they were walking down the street and some people that they knew were walking the other way, and they actually crossed the street to avoid them. The other people had crossed the street to avoid them because they're afraid to confront, grief. I think for a lot of people, grief is scary because I think it reminds you of your own mortality, because, we're all going to die someday. But I think when you see a loss up close. It makes you think of your own mortality and you don't know what to say. And so then it's like, oh, I'll just leave that person be. I don't want to bother them, or, oh, I don't want to invite them out to a movie or something, maybe too soon. And then you just avoid them. And I think that just makes things worse, you know? So to have an understanding of that grief, I think is helpful. And to your point about, you know, relating to your loved one that has passed in a new way, I'm very into family history, and, you know, up on the wall behind me here are pictures of my ancestors. And even though I didn't know them personally, I've heard stories about them, and I keep them with me. I keep their memory alive. You know, I keep their memories, and in some ways, even though I've never met them, I do know them and I relate to them. And it's the same with my mother. You know, she's crossed over, and, you know, I set out her picture and I think of her and I talk to her, and, you know, you just have to find some way to keep them in your life. And I have her things that she owned that were special to her, like her charm bracelet and her clasp ring that I keep with me. And that's just parts of her that I still have and that I cherish.
Thank you, Dottie. One other question that I had, and I'm going to put you a little bit on the spot because I just find such inspiration from you, Dottie. You have been so vulnerable in sharing your grief and your journey of loss, and how it is that you experience it and how it is that you, I guess, journey along with it. And one of those ways that so inspires me is how you have created rituals in your life that honor and celebrate your mother's life, and ones that are also part of a ritual around grief. So yes, there's the grief side to it, but you always do it in such a way that also celebrates and honors your loved one. And so that just so inspires me. And I'm wondering if you have any tips or backstory about how you came to do that and what it means to you to keep carrying that on. As we've talked, you grow with your grief and you're learning new ways to reflect and new ways to be in relationship with this person that's passed. And so I just would love to hear more from you on the area of rituals.
In some ways, it started back when I was a kid. My little sister was stillborn, and so I was actually raised by grieving parents. And we would go to the cemetery a lot. And, you know, birthdays, holidays, Easter, we always went to her gravesite and gave her flowers. So that ritual kind of started young. And my grandmother also was someone that liked to visit grave sites, you know, when her parents passed. And, you know, she liked it when, you know, we would take her to the cemetery to bring them flowers. So I think because my family did that, that may have started the whole ritual thing, you know. I know some people don't go to cemeteries, and that's fine, you know. But for me, it's always been a comfort, you know, to sort of sit there for a while. And so I think it started back then, and I think it just sort of grew from there, you know, putting her picture out. And, you know, when I graduated high school, I wore her class ring to keep her with me. And I think it's just comforting because it makes me feel like she's around, you know. It reminds me that she's still around. And, you know, when I'm at work and I do something good, I'll look at her picture like, you know, Mom would be proud of that. You know, when I you know, got a raise, like I looked at Mom's picture and like, oh, you know, Mom would be tickled about that, you know. And yeah, it's just a way of keeping them with me, you know.
Thank you, Dottie. I so appreciate that. I also appreciate that while it was harder for you this year around her birthday, that you also mentioned a ritual around her birthday. I personally do visit my loved ones, on occasion, they're in a different state. So I try to make it a point when I go visit that state to stop in and say hello to my loved ones who have passed. But the rituals, I don't really have rituals in place, but in my heart, like have not memorized their date of death on purpose for me, for my own self. But I do always take note and remember them extra on their birthdays. So I love that there's no one right or wrong way, but I'm going to be starting to think about what's my ritual besides the extra memories on their birthday. So thank you for sharing that. I appreciate it. I appreciate all of your wisdom you've shared with us today. And again, your heart for sharing with other people and helping them understand grief and knowing what to say and just celebrating the growth and keeping your loved ones with you as you continue to journey here without them. Thank you for being on the podcast.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening. We hope you enjoyed today's podcast and plan to join us again. To learn more about our community, visit us at www.motherlessdaughtersministry.com. And remember, you are not alone.